Jesus is the one who deserves the first word. His name is the highest. His name is the greatest. His name stands above them all because Jesus is the greatest. And Jesus is the one who stands above all authorities, all dominions, all powers as the Lord of all. Jesus is strong and firm. He is gentle and kind. He is holy forever, yet he is wholly present in our midst right now. He's majestic and transcendent, yet intimately present in our gathering. He's the one through whom all things were made. He is the one for whom all things were made. He is the one to whom every knee will one day bow and every tongue will one day confess, you are Lord. He's the light of the world that pierces the darkness. He's the mighty one who saves. He is the great healer, and he's the one who mends broken hearts. He breaks chains, and he sets us free. And he meets with us, and he speaks to us. That's Jesus. And this Jesus has a promise for every one of us. He has a promise for us. So as you grab your seat, just look at someone around you and say, Jesus has a promise for you. Jesus said to his followers, to his friends in the Gospel of John, he said, all I have is yours. All I have is yours. That's a bold and big promise that Jesus gives to his followers. You ever heard Jesus say to you, all I have is yours. I'm giving it to you. It's yours. Have it. All that he has is offered to us, and yet how often when we examine our lives, there feels like there's just such a vast chasm between what is promised and what we experience. What do we do with that gap? When the promises of what Jesus gives to us feel so foreign to our lived experience. Where the beauty and the glory of Jesus and the so often difficulties we experience, it feels like they're at such odds with each other. Jesus has said, all I have is yours. We can be one. You will do greater things. What's true for me can be true for you. And yet when we look at our lives, like, I don't know. It doesn't really feel like it. What do we do when we know that we've okay, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. I'm in, but now what? How does this work? How does this happen? How do I do this apprenticing with you? If the promise of a connected life is there, why do we so frequently feel so disconnected? That's what Jesus taught his friends in John chapter 15, and it's what we believe Jesus wants to teach us, his friends, today. John chapter 15, starting with verse 1, it says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you're like a branch that's thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. Jesus is teaching his friends, and I like to picture the scene. They had just finished one of their last meals together before Jesus goes to the cross. Jesus had just washed their feet. They're at the table. He broke bread. He talked about wine being the symbol of the new covenant. They're just about to walk to the Garden of Gethsemane. And right before they do that, Jesus says to his followers, I am the true vine. Now, for the people in the room being immersed in a thoroughly Jewish agricultural society, he's using language that they would have picked up on immediately, both theologically and just practically. He's saying, just like any hope for grapes are dependent on the grapevine, any hope for life, any hope for fruit in your life is dependent on being connected to me. And then I picture them leaving the upper room, walking across the valley, walking to the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's like, guys, look, these vines, this is how life works. This is the story of reality. I am the true vine. And if you're connected to me, what's true for me will be true for you. I will nourish you and sustain you. He's saying whatever you connect yourself to will be the fuel for your life. Whatever you connect yourself to will define the kind of fruit that is produced in your life. Jesus even emphasizes it in verse 1. He says, I am the true vine, which obviously means Jesus acknowledges there are false options. There are false vines that we can connect ourselves to. Look, there's a ton of places, spaces, or situations or things that we can connect ourselves to. Places or spaces that we try to find power for living, fuel for living. Things that we can look to try and produce fruit in our lives, purpose or meaning or joy, security. And Jesus is saying the only true one, the only one that will last is me. Jesus is saying be really, really careful what source you tap into for your life. Be careful what you connect yourself to. It will dictate everything for you. In verse 6, Jesus says, if you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that's thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. And Jesus is saying, if we seek our sustenance for life in any vine other than him, it will eventually wither away. It will eventually wither away. But here's the thing with the withering process. When it comes to branches, it's really slow. It can be really hard to detect what's withering. It's hard to discern. It's subtle. I brought this branch from my backyard, from a tree in my backyard. I cut it yesterday before the service last night. It's still totally green. I looked, I brought it home last night, and I compared it to the tree in my backyard, to its former tree mates that did not get cut yesterday. And it is indiscernible that this is disconnected from the tree compared to the ones around it. Even, 20 hours later or whatever it is. But make no mistake, this branch is withering. But it's hard to tell, because the withering process can be a slow one. In fact, if I went this afternoon after the services and I taped this really, really well to the tree that I cut this from 100 yards away, nobody would know. From 10 yards away, nobody would know. and nobody would know for a really long time. Because it's starting to wither, but over the next little while, these leaves will fade. Eventually they'll fall off, but it's fall time. All the leaves are going to be falling off. And then it's going to be a bare branch hanging onto the tree. It would be indetectable that this is withering and dying until next spring. So like 11 months from now. But it's withering. It's dying. It's fading. Even though the leaves are still green and it still looks pretty good, it's withering. And Jesus is saying, if we attach ourselves to any source other than him, we too will wither. And it may be indetectable because it's slow. And we may look just the same as everyone around us. We may look the same as we did when we were connected. But if we're not remaining in him, our soul is atrophying. This withering process may take a decade or two. It may take a month or two. It may take a day or two. But the withering process begins the moment we do not connect ourselves to Jesus. People around us may think we look great. People may think that we're totally normal. Depends on how good we are at covering, how good we are at taping it back to where it once was. But eventually, any source for power outside of Jesus will be revealed as finite. Any connection to anything outside of Jesus will wither and the fruit will dry. And in a city as amazing as Calgary is, there are so many great temptations for us to derive power from. Maybe it's climbing the corporate ladder. Maybe it's having the right style. Maybe it's having the right neighborhood, the right car. Maybe it's having the right kind of family dynamic, the certain kind of office location, having the certain relationship status, being in the right circle of friends at school, making the right club, the right sports team, getting into the right program, having the right GPA. In Calgary, it is so easy to thrive societally all the while our soul is withering because we're trying to derive power for living from sources outside of Jesus. What are you trying to find your source for power for living from? What are you trying to connect to provide fruit in your life? I learned this week that the word priority first appeared in the English language in the 1400s. And for the next 500 years, it was only ever singular. It wasn't until we came along in the 20th century where we're like, no, we need to make this plural because we can have multiple priorities. And Greg McCown in Essentialism, he writes, illogically, we reasoned that by changing the word, we could change reality. We can make this thing plural, but at the end of the day, there's still always one priority, no matter how often we want to try and pluralize it. And what Jesus is really saying here is, what's the priority for your life? What are you connected to? I wonder how often we try to reason that we can change reality as well. That we can attach ourselves to people, to places, to spaces, to things, and to not have that shape our lives. Jesus is saying, I am the true vine, and there are false options. You can attach yourself to them, but it will wither, it will fade. If you attach yourself to me, you will bear much fruit. We can say all we want, but whatever vine singular we attach ourselves to will fundamentally define and shape our lives. Jesus then says, he cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Now, quickly, verse 3, you're already clean because of the word I've spoken to you. What that really means is Jesus is saying, this isn't about your salvation. You're already clean. You've been sanctified and washed by the word. You are already clean. This is how you live out your salvation. This is how you apprentice to me. That's what he's saying here. And he says, some branches are cut and thrown into the big pile that we'll see this time of year on farms because it's all the deadfall, it's all the branches. Like, if you're withering, that's where you're going to go. But then he says, all the other branches, they will be pruned so that more fruit will come. But notice, every single branch gets cut. And virtually anytime I talk about John 15 in devotional or otherwise, I like to ask, at what point do you think the branch knows if it's being cut or being pruned? Because every branch is getting cut. And a cut branch and a pruned branch look and feel the exact same to everyone but the gardener, who knows. Jesus says the branch that's not bearing fruit is cut and left to wither, which means those branches that aren't remaining in him, that aren't bearing much fruit, the cutting that they experience is the gardener simply leaving them as a branch to fend for themselves. Much like this branch is now just relying on the limited resources that it has. The leaves will stay green for a little bit. The bigger the branch, the longer it will take for those resources to dry up. But Jesus is saying the gardener, if they're not remaining, they'll just get cut and then they're just left to their own devices. And what a scary thought for us, that we're just left to our own sources. We have to conjure up our own strength. We have to find our own nourishment. We have to attempt fruit with no reserves. Do you ever feel like you're just running on empty? No energy, there's no fruit, there's no vitality, there's no joy. Maybe the passion or the exuberance that was once real for you just feels like a distant foreign memory. There's no hope, there's no love, there's no joy, there's no perseverance, there's no endurance anymore. It's not meant to be that way. It's not meant to be that way. Life is not meant to be lived like that. Connect yourself to Jesus, his life for you. Jesus says some people will get cut, left to their own reserves, but then Jesus also says some people will get pruned so that there can be more fruit. Pruned so that there's more fruit. Friends, there is always a purpose to the pruning when it comes to our good gardener. We often have this notion that following Jesus means that life will get easier and easier, and the more we remain in him, the more straightforward things will go. But it appears Jesus is saying, the more you grow, the more you abide in Jesus, the more you will need to get pruned. The more things will need to be cut out of your life. And Jesus is straight up with us, right up front, that pruning is a fundamental part of the discipleship process. If you want vibrant fruit in your life, you have to hang in there through the pruning. And I don't think we often talk about the pruning enough, the cutting out of things from our lives enough, that it is essential to the discipleship process. Our good gardener wants to prune things from us. If a tree isn't pruned properly, the whole thing may be destroyed the following season. Because if you don't prune a branch, it may not have the strength for what's coming. And none of us know what the future holds, but our gardener does. And perhaps the pruning he wants to do in our lives is to prepare us for what's coming next. Maybe he wants to prune you for something that's a year or 10 away. Pruning also prevents us from growing in unsustainable ways. I was listening to some people that know a whole lot more about garden and pruning and flowering than I do, and they were saying that a common problem with a whole bunch of flower plants is that they will create more buds than the plant can actually sustain. Naturally, the natural process for this plant is more buds are produced than it can actually nourish and sustain. So a wise gardener would come along and prune it so that the plant can live, so that the best buds can have the best resources to become the best flowers. A wise gardener, though, has to cut away totally healthy buds in order for the plant to survive and to flourish. And it is in God's kindness that sometimes he prunes us in a way that removes totally okay things for other people, but they're not best for us. Because he knows who we are and he knows what we need. And so he prunes us because he loves us. So can I just put the question out there, challenge each and every one of us, a challenge especially for this time of year? Does our gardener want to prune things out of our calendar, out of our lives, so that we can become who we're meant and called and created to be? Are there hobbies? Are there activities? Are there attitudes? Are there habits? Are there inner realities that we need pruned? I think it's a particular challenge to parents these days. Do we need activities pruned out? Do your kids need that for their flourishing, for their health, for their future? Pruning out things that are good so that we can have fruit that's eternal, fruit that lasts. Oh, but Kyle, I need that activity. Okay. But just know that it will eventually wither. And it will eventually fade. And know that there's better fruit available. There's a better option. The Christian life isn't one of uninhibited additions. More activities, more filled calendars, more filled schedules, more meetings, more commitments, more activity, more purchasing, more this, more that, more acquiring. It's one of pruning so that we can have more fruit. I get so concerned for all of us at how we are so inclined to living such a recklessly fast-paced life and what that's doing to our soul. It's malforming us. It's malforming our lives. We aren't developing in the right ways. We need to be pruned by a good gardener. Is there things the good gardener wants to prune in your heart, in your rhythm, in your life? I know like two things about pruning. I know how to cut branches and I know how to put them in the green bin. And that's about the total understanding I have about pruning. But when I talk to my friends that own orchards or that are like specialists in this area, I learned there's actually an optimal method to pruning. Who knew? There's a proper angle to cut at. There's a place to cut that's ideal. There's a season to cut. There is a way to do it. And I learned that pruning is an absolutely essential part to survival and flourishing fruit. Which means when a pruning knife is in my hand, it's a weapon because I don't know what I'm doing with it. And I've butchered some bushes in my day. And by day, I mean like every spring or whatever. I just butcher bushes. But it means the pruning knife in a gardener's hand is a tool for life. And so the good gardener, with his pruning shears or his pruning knife, wants to speak to us and prune us. It's not a weapon. It's a tool for life. Do you trust him enough to prune you? One of the most famous statues in the world is Michelangelo's David. It's incredible. It's a fantastic piece of art. It's a massive piece of art. Michelangelo made this statue of David. Before it was this piece of art, though, it was an 18-foot slab of marble that weighed 24,000 pounds. This massive chunk of marble. And Michelangelo was once asked, how did you turn that slab of stone into this incredible statue, David? And Michelangelo famously answered, I just took away everything that wasn't David. Just took away everything that wasn't David. And friends, when our good gardener prunes us, he's just taking away everything that isn't us. He's helping us become who he knows us to be. He's restoring our humanity. He's taking away everything that's not Kyle, or everything that's not you. And when God prunes, there's no weapons involved. It's all instruments for life. God will never steal healthy joy from you. He will never steal your life. He gives joy. He gives life. He multiplies life. God prunes so that there can be fruit that lasts in your life. And from this verse on pruning, he moves to a section on prayer, and Jesus says, if you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. Now, how many times has that verse been taken out of context by someone? Ask whatever you wish and it will be given to you. All right, and you'll turn on the TV late at night and see certain people praying for a plane. It's like, I'm asking. And whatever I wish, I'm going to get. I'm getting a plane. I'm getting an island. You see people taking this verse all the time in weird ways. It's led to a whole lot of name it, claim it, prosperity, gospel. And it's led to some weird places. But here's my hot take with that verse, is that Jesus meant it. Jesus meant it. Ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. Here's why. Because Jesus is talking to his followers here. He's talking to his friends. He's talking to his disciples. Jesus is teaching people who have embodied what we looked at last week, people who have left, people who had left their comfort zones, people who had died to self and chosen to connect themselves to Jesus. He's talking to people who were washed and sanctified by the word. They were living in obedient surrender to him. They had been pruned repeatedly. They were holding fast to Jesus. And to those people, Jesus is saying, ask and it will be done. Ask and it will be done. But notice Jesus says, ask whatever you wish, it will be done for you, but this is to my Father's glory. Yes, Jesus might answer that prayer, but all the glory always goes to the Father. And so show me a person in this world who has left their comforts, left their life behind to follow Jesus. Show me a person who's connected to him, who has been sanctified by his word, living under the authority of God's word, who has been pruned by the gardener and knows the pruning cuts to grow more fruit. Show me a person who's been washed by the words of Jesus, surrendered, trusting, obedient, holding on to Jesus, and I'll show you a person whose prayers are utterly trustworthy. Because they're not praying for an island. They're praying for God's kingdom to come, no matter what that may mean. Their prayers are aligned with the heart of the Father because they're like, my life is only for his glory. I'm only after his glory. And their prayers are trustworthy. Are our prayers trustworthy? Immediately after this wild verse of ask whatever and it'll be done for you to the glory of my Father, comes, I think, an even more wild verse. and perhaps one of the most wild ones in the Bible. If it wasn't attributed to Jesus saying this, it would be hard to believe, but Jesus says, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. Can you imagine how loved Jesus was by the Father? Like, imagine that dynamic. They're in the secret places of prayer. They're journeying together. There's this intimate connectedness between Jesus and his Father. There was this deep, passionate love, and Jesus saying, that same dynamic is what I'm offering you. Remain in this love. Remain in this love. That's how much Jesus loves us. The invitation to pruning, the invitation to remaining, is an invitation from love because he knows who we are. If you want life and life to the full, the way it's designed to be, bursting with real fruit, if you really, really want that, Jesus has told us how to get it. By remaining in his love. That's where the real fruit comes from him. He takes responsibility to produce this. There's no branch in this world that's like, I'm gonna make an apple. It's the natural process of being connected to the whole branch, to the vine. She's saying, I will produce this in you. Speaking of real fruit, at the beginning of this message, when I was starting to work on it, I thought, it'd be pretty funny if I maybe grabbed a slightly bigger branch, but then I just tied or taped a whole bunch of apples to it. And I think if I did it, picked a big enough branch, I don't think anybody would really know that they were just taped apples to the branch. I would have said the exact same thing about the withering process. These apples are starting, the withering process has begun. And it probably would have looked okay for most people in the room. There would have just been all these, taped apples to it. But as I made my way through this message and thought more and more about it, that idea began to become less and less and less funny to me because I realized it's what so many of us do. We're absolutely withering on the inside. We're dying. And we're just taping fruit to ourselves to try and convince the people around us that we're doing okay. No, look, I'm doing fine. Look at all this fruit. But it's taped. And if I manufactured some apples on here, nobody would know, but if you got close enough, you would all know. And maybe that's why we don't let certain people get close to us, because we don't want them to know that we're actually just kind of faking it and that our soul really is withering. For some of us, if we're really honest, we know we're withering on the inside. There is no flourishing happening. And so we just tape fruit to ourselves to try and show everyone and convince others we're doing okay. But we're dying on the inside. Yet we show up, we pretend it's all good, and it's like, just tape a strawberry, a blueberry. We come around here, we sing the songs, we know the words, we know the routine, we know the rhythm, we know how this thing goes. Maybe we volunteer, maybe we don't, but we're dying on the inside. We're withering away. And the problem when we tape fruit to ourselves is at the moment the first storm comes, or when something challenges us, or we get treated poorly, or we see that person, or we lose that investment, or we don't meet the special person we thought we would meet, or the dreams don't materialize, or we fail the test. The first time something comes and it shakes us, all the fruit flies away. Jesus wants to transform us from the inside out so thoroughly, so wholly, that we can withstand those challenges. He wants to produce the fruit of the Spirit in our lives so that when people hate us, we can be, that's okay, I've got enough love for the both of us. When there's chaos in this world, we can have pure, resilient, resounding joy. When the world is crumbling, we can have peace. When everyone is in a rush to get somewhere, to get something, we can have patience. When people are mean and angry or rude, we can respond with kindness. When badness abounds, we can have goodness. When we're betrayed or lied to or hurt, we can say, it's well with my soul, and we can be faithful. When someone is angry, we can respond with gentleness. And in a world where it seems like so many people are just living unrestrained lives, we can have self-control. That is the fruit of the Spirit that Jesus produces within us. And it's fruit that lasts through the real challenges of life. And it comes from us hanging on to Him, staying with Him, trusting Him enough, being pruned, remaining in Him. Oh, friend, connect yourself to the firm foundation of Jesus, because He loves you so much and He sees who you are. If you want life the way it's meant to be, connect yourself to Jesus. Just hang on to Him. Apart from Him, we can do nothing. I was thinking about it yesterday when I was walking into the church. I was thinking, man, this branch survived some crazy storms this summer, right? It wasn't that long ago, baseballs were falling from the sky of ice, right? Like the trees in our backyard were like, woo! There was lightning, there was, there were some crazy storms this summer. And you know what? This branch survived every single one of them. You want to know what it didn't survive? Being cut off. It's withering. And when we connect ourselves to Jesus, no matter what storm may come, no matter what unexpected reality, no matter what lightning or rain or hail or illness or sickness or bankruptcy or relationship dissolving, no matter what storm may come our way, losing the job, failing the test, not making the team, whatever storm may come, we can remain secure because the vine promises to take care of us. So can we commit to being the kind of people that we're just gonna hang on to Jesus no matter what comes our way, because we can be as secure as He is? Do you know Jesus as your firm foundation, nourishing your soul? Hang on to Him. Let yourself be pruned. Jesus has never failed to produce fruit in any branch that's connected to Him. In every situation, every circumstance, every trial, every generation, Jesus has never failed to produce fruit in the lives of those who are connected to Him. He has never failed. He's not going to start today. Are you connected to the true vine? He promises you His life. He has offered you His love. All for His glory. Oh, friend, remain in Him. He's never failed. He won't start now.